The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent, including Olas Media.
Olas Media.
This Olas Media simulcast is brought to you by the Dear San Diego and Independent Voter podcast.
Dear San Diego.
To me, Dear San Diego is a look under the hood of San Diego's high performers and
a platform for newsmakers to come in and talk about who they are away from the
space, in the corporate space, the people that are making news. We get to look at their daily
to
activities.
lean into their personalities. Who are they? How do they make things work? What's the secret sauce?
Dear San Diego. So I'm happy to introduce our guest today. He's someone I know very well, one of my political mentors, someone who's forgotten more about California politics than a lot of people actually know, including me. Steve Peace, former member of the California State Senate, former California Director of Finance, movie producer, writer, co-founder of IVP, and author of California's Top 2 Primary. And I would say a concerned and involved citizen. Steve, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Juan?
Pretty good.
Good to see you, Steve. Thanks for being here.
So, Steve, you were the author of California's Top 2 Primary. Can you talk to us about the inception of it? Where does it come from? What was the objective?
And just briefly explain what it means for our listeners.
Sure. The Top 2 Primary is what brought about the founding of the Independent Voter Project. Mm-hmm. And its purpose is today to ensure that elections and important decisions are made when the most people vote. And the most people vote in November and the general elections. In congressional races, assembly races, and Senate races, state Senate races, this is particularly problematic in the old closed primary system, which we still have for presidential campaigns. Mm-hmm. Whoever gets the nomination of one party or the other party, election's over. The general election doesn't matter because most of these districts, over 85% of the districts, are either safe Republican or safe Democratic. And so our principal goal and our focus was to create a more competitive environment in which the voters would still have a choice in November when the most people voted. And that often means, in order to have a competitive race and a race in which the vote is meaningful in November, that in one particular district it might be 2 Republicans, in another district it's 2 Democrats. And we candidly at the time envisioned it might be a Democrat and a Green in a Northern California campaign, or a Libertarian and a Republican in another heavily conservative district. It's a fundamental belief that you get the best democracy when elections are competitive and when the most people are voting.
So the Top 2 Primary, I just received my ballot in the mail. I'm a vote by mail voter. I think a lot of us are there or moving in that direction. So explain to me, when I open up my ballot, Top 2 Primary, how does that play out on my ballot? What does that mean?
Whoever gets the most amount of votes and the second most amount of votes, regardless of their political party, move on to the November election. And you will note that on your ballot, all the candidates are on the ballot, regardless of their party affiliation. So if you're a Republican, but you happen to think the Libertarian running or the Democrat running, or it's your next door neighbor and they know and you want to vote for that person, you vote for that person. There's no restriction. It's a voter empowerment system, as opposed to the old closed primary system, which is a political party empowered system and an insider.
So the old system, juxtapose the old system with the new system. So the old system, it would be a Republican and a Democrat moving on, regardless?
Right. First of all, most importantly, only Republicans would vote in the Republican primary and only Democrats would vote in the Democratic primary. And whoever was selected by their respective primary, where typically the turnout is 35% of the voters, as opposed to 80% of the voters in November. So a very small number of people would select who the candidates are from each party. Mm. And then those two would be in the general election. And then you're in a general election where typically 75% of the voters are going to vote for either the Republican or the Democrat, and so there's no campaign, and it just doesn't matter. So half of the voters who participated in November literally are disenfranchised, have no choice.
So you authored this two primary system, and when did you author it? What year?
2010.
So a better system.
Well, at least
clearly,
one, I was thinking about it when he was talking about it. Like, it would be like the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers getting together before the season starts and saying, hey, how do we want to write this rule so that we make it to the Super Bowl, right?
You know, there's a lot of people that believe that is the way
I
that
know.
it
That's
works.
what I was thinking about. That's why it made sense. There's a lot of people
Don't
saying
start
that's
with
how it
the
works.
Detroit Lion fan over here on the hot mic. And so this system is better, but I think where we're headed here with today's episode is this system is flawed. That you drafted, and there's actually a better way. But you mentioned earlier independent voters, and but you just sort of glanced over. You didn't. Can you talk about why this is important for independent voters?
A number of retired political guys out of Sacramento, including myself, participated in bringing about the creation of the Independent Voter Project. We basically looked at the last decade of our service and saw the system failing. And I often say to people, what's important about the significant improvements that have occurred as a result of the top two primary isn't about who gets elected. It's about how they behave after they get elected. And what we now begin to see is the consultants and the less scrupulous politicians embracing the tactics to manipulate around the top two primary for that very reason, in which we'll talk about some specific examples in this year's election cycle. So this was a bunch of Republican and Democrat former elected officials and some staff people, former governor's staff people, and whatnot, said, how can we make this system better? Now, what was it that we looked at? All you have to do is look at the gridlock in Congress in Washington, D.C. Look at the immigration vote, and you see what we saw. We see politicians in service who are answerable to their primary voters, not to the general election voters. And when that produces gridlock, because if I'm going to get reelected, who am I speaking to? I'm going to speak to and try to impress, if I'm a Democrat, the most liberal members of my community, the activists.
Your base.
And similarly to the Republican side. So you have a combination of people getting elected who tend to be more extreme in their view, but it's really more a matter of the politicians get there and they are focused on re-election and they have no choice and they get stampeded. I know they were my friends, they were close associates. I can tell you over and over again stories about painfulness that legislators had about feeling they had to vote a certain way, and they knew it was wrong. But they were trapped by a system that rewarded not cooperating, not getting along. Look, democracy is nothing more than a system by which we agree to compromise and live with things that aren't exactly what we want, as opposed to killing each other.
No, that's a great point. Very well said.
Yes.
Compromise is the art of politics, right? The art of governing. Juan, do you know in California and in San Diego, and Steve, you probably know this, what's the breakdown? How many independent voters, how many Republican voters, how many Democratic voters do we have?
I don't know the exact number. I know in California there's more, and that's a point that I wanted to make, there's more MPPs than Republicans now.
NPPs are no party preference or independent voters. So there's more NPPs in California than there are Republican voters. That's something, yeah.
But look, it's really, the truth is when you get down to real people as opposed to political people and people that are active and paying a lot of attention, folks don't wake up in the morning and first thing on their mind is, God, I'm a Republican. Isn't it great to be around? Their party affiliation is a very minor element of their sense of identity. Our identity is more rooted in our who we are in our occupations, our relationship with our spouses or significant others, our children, our grandchildren. This is what makes up identity. And candidly, we're a little bit different people with everybody. You as a father are different to your child than you are to me and to your friends or your buddies or this or whatever. This is part of the reason why I was in the legislature. I got so deeply in 25 years ago on the issue of privacy and worried about this emerging technology. And because what happens in a internet world where everything is transparent, we have this kind of view that, well, we just make everything transparent and everything's great and it's wonderful. Well, think about what that does to who a human being is. And a lot of conversation about, quote, identity politics. When you diminish the subconscious selectivity we all have, and we're biologically programmed this to present ourselves differently to our children, for example,
Right.
where we have an authority role and a responsibility than we would to our friends and to our lovers or whoever they may
Right.
be. I'm a fundamentally different person with my mother than I would be with my
your
wife
sons,
or
yeah.
my sons or whatever it may
Right.
be. And when we homogenize and distribute every little micro thing we know about each other distributedly, we're diminishing those senses of identity. We're not enhancing that identity. So for people who run for office, I often say to them, look, the single most important thing is to be authentic, to be who you are. But who is that in the public sense? You know, I served with people who were spectacularly brilliant legislative minds and did really good things for the public and were totally messed up personally. And I served with people who were great role models I would want my children and grandchildren to
But
emulate.
lousy
But
lawmakers.
they were
yeah.
pathetic. And then there's some the other way. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just, so these different
balance.
things, we have these different skills and whatnot. So it's amazing in a democratic process and the power of people in the collective to sort out these things and figure out who do I want to represent me and make reasonably good decisions about things that they're going to know more about because they spend more time with it. And if we don't believe that, then we should abandon the whole concept of representative democracy and go to direct democracy.
Yeah.
Right? So then we get to where we're at today. As you point out, the political some of the political consultants and others have begun to manipulate the top two primary. This is could be any system you go, they will go in and try to do. So you have to kind of stay on the thing. It's kind of like when you guys have a lot of expertise in social media and the algorithms keep changing and you have to change how you do your messaging because the algorithm.
Oh yeah, there's always
right?
somebody out there trying to game the system.
Right. So
no matter
where are we
what-
at now? We're now
what
in the
field.
phase where, and you see it very graphically in the U.S. Senate campaign, where right now in this moment in time, it wasn't like this 20 years ago. It may not be like this 20 years from now. But right now, the statewide electorate is overwhelmingly Democratic. Steve Garvey is a Republican, most likely person seeking and endorsed by the Republican Party and whatnot. But he's not going to be competitive in a general election.
Not in California.
Right. Not in California, not in this time.
Because
And
he's a Republican. He's a very well-known.
he's got name ID.
Yeah, former
but
Major
for a
League
variety of
Baseball
reasons,
player.
But he's not a strong candidate. You can just go and listen to
So in
his
the
debate
gen-
on the radio.
So
in
the
a general, he's a
election,
weak candidate.
He's,
okay?
he's not a strong candidate in the general.
When was the last time that a Republican did well statewide?
Well, how many statewide elected Republicans do we have?
the governor,
None.
right? It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Right, and some may argue
Steve
that
Garvey is no Arnold Schwarzenegger.
yeah. And some of us may argue it was really Maria Shriver, the Democrat, who was the governor, but that's a whole other conversation. So what has Adam Schiff's campaign done?
And by the way, this is the race to fill Di-Fi's seat.
Right. So you have Adam Schiff, who has the most money on the Democratic side. He's kind of the establishment corporate Democrat candidate.
Good name ID.
You have Barbara Lee, longtime member of Congress, and prior to that, a member of the legislature. I served with her in the legislature from the Bay Area. And you have Katie Porter, who I don't know, who served in Congress and now is running for the U.S. Senate. Clearly, Schiff does not want to run against Porter. Now, there's some really simple demographic reasons why he wouldn't want to do that. We talk a lot about the difference in voting behavior between Democrats and Republicans. The truth is, nationwide, the voting patterns of men and women are actually more different today than most of the demographic breakouts of Republicans and Democrats. The real divide in America today is between how women look at the world in politics and how men look at the world in politics. That too will probably resolve itself over time. But right now, you look at the data and you look at, just look at some of the national polling. You can see it in the Trump-Biden thing. The one nice thing the Trump-Biden clash does for political analysts is to give you some stark contrast where voters because basically, which is incidentally the exact same issue we're talking about. Americans don't want a Trump-Biden campaign.
Yeah.
And lots of Americans may like Trump.
You do
and
hear
they
a lot
Biden.
about
Right.
suburban moms and,
It's over. Now, here's the other aspect of this. Women not only outnumber men in terms of number of registered voters, but they vote at much higher propensities. So if you're Adam Schiff and you want to win a general election, you want to run against Steve Garvey, the old white guy Republican. You do not want to run against
Katie Porter,
the suburban woman, Katie Porter. So what does he do? He runs television commercials that look like, for the first 15 seconds of the 30 seconds, a Steve Garvey campaign, and then close it with and I'm a good guy too, vote for me. And how do they articulate it? In the starkest, uncompromising context you possibly can. You're either a Trump Republican, right, or you're a doctrinaire left-wing Democrat, right? And what happens is the consultants, because this whole generation of consultants understand the power of campaigns that are driven by turnout rather than persuasion. They've all abandoned even the effort to try and persuade people in the middle. It's about dividing people, making it simple, much simpler to do all with the benefit of the modern data analysis we can do. We know what magazines they subscribe to or whatever. The guy who subscribes to a gun magazine probably isn't anti-gun, right? In the most simplistic. So you have incredible. They
so their
know
goal
more,
is to turn out their base.
Yeah,
Correct.
it's the most predictable way to run a campaign.
and these
right?
guys know
Republicans will
more
Republicans.
about the voters than the voters know about themselves. They can predict how that voter's going to vote before the voters even thought about what they're going to do. So now that's a Democrat example, statewide example. Locally,
And Katie Porter, to her credit, she's come out recently in campaign emails and press releases and pointed this out.
But it's in her interest to do that, right? She has to. And so I'm not picking sides in terms of the candidates here. And on a personal level, I don't respect the consultants and the folks that are attacking the system in doing this, because it is fundamentally undermines democracy. But let me give you an example on the other side of the fence.
Katie, she was recently quoted as saying, let me pull this up right here, and then we'll move on to the local. She says here, Adam Schiff knows he will lose to me in November. That's why he is brazenly cynical. That's why this brazenly cynical ad he's running to further his own political career and boost a Republican candidate to do it.
And just to get into the nitty-gritty of that, what is Schiff exactly doing? So he's trying to get Republicans to vote Republican. He's actually propping him up with Republicans, spending money so the Republicans know that Garvey's Republican.
He wants the Garvey numbers to make sure they go above the Porter numbers. Okay,
Right.
Simple as that. This is a fight for they're polling right. It's about second place, and I would candidate statements always are. For understandable reasons, are tainted to embrace themselves, right?
Absolutely.
So I would embrace Porter's concept with dropping out. Not so much they know they lose to Porter, it's they fear they lose to Porter, and the Garvey campaign's an easier campaign.
Easier win.
Correct.
Right.
So you go to a local, heavily Republican district, which I happen to live in, is a assembly district, and you have, I think, 2 or 3 Democrats on the ballot, and you have an endorsed Republican, and at the very last minute, Carl DeMaio decided to get in the race. So now you have a dynamic where you have a high-profile, high-name ID Republican, a Republican who's endorsed by the party and most elected officials and whatnot, sort of call it an outsider Republican and more of an establishment Republican, and you have 2 or 3 Democratic candidates.
Strong Republican district.
Yeah, this district is 0 chance of electing a Democrat under any circumstances. Okay?
And the established Republican, I think, is a young gentleman who worked for Supervisor Joel Anderson.
No, he works for
I don't think
state superintendent, state senator.
I think he used to work for Joel. I don't think he doesn't work for Joel now. But somebody who's established knows.
He's on the Lakeside School
Yeah.
Board.
Okay.
He's an elected official in his own right. He's a Chamber of Commerce
Right.
official. And thing. Anyway, that doesn't matter who the players are for this purposes. You have, I have right here a piece of mail I got at my house. You'll say, right here, it says, officially endorsed by the California Democratic Party, Kevin Jusa, right, for state assembly. Now, this is the Democrat, the leading Democrat, right? And I look, well, who's it paid for? Paid for by the California Latino Voter Alliance Endorsement Guide. Well, Latino, okay, just want to make sure. Well, who does that turn out to be? Well, that turns out to be a committee controlled by Carl DeMaio.
What is it called again? The committee?
It's not the DeMaio committee.
Yeah, the California Latino Voter Alliance
Okay.
Voter Guide, okay?
So Carl is the Republican candidate that's
Trying to pick his opponent.
Yes.
He wants to make sure the opponent in the general election is a Democrat, not a fellow Republican. Now, why is that
How is
important?
this legal that a candidate for office can control a committee that doesn't disclose that he controls the committee?
Well, that's a whole different conversation. There may be some issues because the amount of mail in this campaign is unbelievable. There are a number of committees, and with some rather strange disclosure information. But look, real solutions for voters, for citizens, as opposed to the people that are active in the system. Part of our problem is our election laws have created these things. You go back 25 years ago, money was given to candidates. Candidates had to report where they got the money from, and we knew who the campaigns was. Ironically, by adopting campaign limits, we've pushed that money into a bunch of independent IE type expenditures, and we know less about, and the candidates have less responsibility for their work product than ever. But that's a whole, I'd love to try to address that issue, and it's a hard one. I argue with my wife about this all the time. She says, we got to get the money out of the politics. I say, yeah, theoretically, you got to get the money out of the politics. But what happens when you disconnect the economy from the politics? And now you got a bunch of people that get elected, or a bunch of demagogues that are standing on the corner, saying a bunch of nonsense because they're not responsible for what the outcome is. The people that have to live with the real world consequences of the things. I used to say my job as a politician, as an elected official, was making reasonably decent decisions with hopelessly inadequate information. I always knew less about what I was legislating than the people that had to live with
it's tough
the
to make a decision when
And
you
you
don't feel
gotta
like
be-
it's an
you gotta
informed
be
decision.
cautious.
And every
no matter what
solution-
decision you're making,
Yeah.
whether it's about your family or your work or you're a legislator, I mean, you want to make an informed decision.
And every solution opens up another box of problems, right? Which
Which
think
is where we're at today.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
this is why the Independent Voter Project, along with a alliance of 30 or 40 other national reform organizations, have now embraced the concept of ranked choice top 4 or top 5. Alaska just adopted this system last election cycle.
So let's connect the dots. So the author of the top two primary system has seen it gamed, and you started the Independent Voter Project, which I want you to briefly explain to our listeners what that is. But that group, along with others from around the country now, is advocating for ranked choice voting, which other states and some other cities have adopted. We need to get into that.
And other organizations too. I know the Oscars use a very similar system to ranked choice voting. So it's not just like it's not
The Democratic Party locally here.
Yes.
Some of the Democratic Party
Let's
clubs
be
use
careful
ranked choice
because
voting.
it's ranked choice top 4 or top 5. It's a blend.
So explain
of
the difference between the
Right.
what we
So
have now and the ranked choice voting.
Ranked choice top 4, top 5, rather than advancing 2 to November, the top 4, either system works. Top 4, top 5, I'm fine with either one. You move 4 or 5 candidates to the general election. Then in the general election, voters get a ballot, 1 through 5, and they simply rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So
Sounds simple.
Well, let me tell you why.
But I've heard from some Democrats who say it's confusing. It'll disenfranchise Latino voters who were just getting out to the polls. So is it confusing? Does it disenfranchise?
No,
voters?
it's the confusion is perpetrated by partisan Democrats who currently have power and don't want to change any system because why should you change
Well,
a
that's a
system
mic drop
if
right
you
there.
have power? I mean, look, and the Republicans would do exactly the same thing.
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
So if you
Why
never
change a system
they're
if it's
never
working
going to
for
change
us?
a system, right? So here's, and guess what? Ranked choice, pure ranked choice without top 4, type 5 is confusing, and it is subject to gaming. We see it in the Bay Area where they have ranked choice for municipal elections, and it's a disaster. And why is that? Because, and there's some really good hard science on this in terms of how our brains function. We literally, as human beings, process up to the number 5 differently than once you get to 6. Okay, I can't tell you why that is. Maybe it has to do with our fingers. I don't know. But our ability to hold information and conceive of a ranking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to that number is literally uses different parts of the brain.
So
right?
much easier than saying rank 13.
13 or 14 or 15, right? So we have people, and there are folks who support pure ranked choice, and that's what they want. But you know what? I'll be candid. I believe the people have promoted pure ranked choice and want lots of thing and use ranked choice in the primary and then go. I believe, and this isn't all the people that are in there, but really the money behind that is really nasty, scary people whose agenda is to attempt to create so much confusion that they can elect people that otherwise would have no chance of getting elected. And the dysfunction in the Bay Area is evidence of that fact. So, but it's like anything else in life. We live in a reality of grays and pastels, not black, white, and bright colors. Even bad ideas have good features, and good ideas have bad features. We learned through top 2, there's 2 things I don't like about that 2, which I authored. First, it's infinitely better than what we had before.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
No doubt about that.
Right.
But like everything in the reform space, it's a continuum. You keep trying to get better, and you figure what, as you prove things, you learn what the weaknesses of them are. 2 weaknesses. We had one weakness is a pretty simple one. Had an argument amongst those of us supporting it about write-ins. Should you allow write-ins in the November or not? Or not? Carl Munger Jr., who was amongst those supporting this, felt strongly you should not allow write-ins because he understood as an active Republican, the Republican Party, that Republicans would fund a write-in, right, in the general election just to cause problems. He was right. But it also, I tended to be on the other side of that conversation, and I deferred on it. And I still think there's a problem here. First of all, I just have a sort of fundamental on principle notion that write-ins are a way of disciplining the system, okay? You may recall years ago, I was very much involved in the Donna Fry riot-in for mayor, which actually we won. And if you'll recall, they disqualified votes because of they didn't fill in they wrote in the name and they didn't fill in the dot. Pure technology.
But she won in a very close election.
She did, but they threw out some votes because they didn't fill in the oval. Yeah. But they wrote her name down.
Yeah. Right. So you're telling me a voter wrote the name down, right?
And put the old,
was the voter intent?
Correct.
That's what what I mean.
Exactly.
Correct. So,
hanging chads.
And again, I come back to that fundamental thing. My fundamental belief is that voters, citizens, are the primary basis from which everything else comes. Anytime you devise an electoral system or whatever you're trying to do, you have to start with the premise that the power comes from people. It doesn't come from interest groups, doesn't come from politicians. You're not trying to... I laugh when I watch the national debate now where people are talking about worrying, and even in the context of this recent Supreme Court decision, the word insurrection, right? Who are we? Are we protecting the institutions? Are we protecting the people? And how do we preserve a system that's orderly so that we avoid being in that environment where I suggested earlier where we solve things by killing people, right? We have to have faith in the institutions to have that work. The reason why you have this tension, you have dissatisfaction, and I don't care whether you want to call them Trump voters or Bernie Sanders voters, they've all lost faith in these institutions. It isn't just the Congress. It isn't just labor leaders. It isn't just business leaders. It's the Rotary Club. It's across the board. And culturally, we have to come to grips with that. Right now, we're in the period of time and moment where, in my view, tragically, people have seized the easiest tool in political dialogue, which is to divide and conquer.
Yeah, I mean, it's created a lot of cynicism against systems, including the voting system.
Right. So what happens is the politicians then, because they get rewarded for that, take all this dissatisfaction and all the frustration and all the fear, and they elevate the fear.
Yeah, they fan the flames. And, right.
So what we try to do, what we're trying to deal with, is to get us to a place where the system
Civility,
rewards.
I understand.
Bringing people. Well, you know what? I don't even like the word civility.
But
because let me tell you why I don't like it. That's a good one, because civility is a great word.
Yeah.
Because civility can be used to disguise lack of responsiveness to the public too. So
fair.
Understand, and this is part of Trump's appeal to the public. They understand
civility.
this this incivil guy.
Right.
And I think one thing we can all agree with, unambiguously, is incivil.
Right.
But people are so dissatisfied whether you're a person in an urban community that doesn't feel that the police treat you fair, or you're living in a rural community environment where you don't have health care.
Yeah, they don't want to hear about civility.
They want a bull in the China
Right.
shop. Yeah.
I understand.
Someone who shattered the
It's
system.
They
about
want
an
action.
accountable system that rewards constructive governance.
So it's about an accountable system that rewards constructive governance. But connect the dots for me, Steve, if you will. If we move to a ranked choice voting system,
Ranked choice top 4.
ranked choice top 4 or top 5.
Which means 13 people run in the primary. That they're basically that doesn't change, right? People go in and vote for whoever they want to vote. And the top 4 people advance to the general election and are then ranked by the voters.
But in the general, then, are they ranked again, or are you just...
Yes,
so
in the general, you'll
you're-
get a ballot. You put 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If there's 5 in the ballot,
In the primary, it doesn't change. It's basically the same as right
primary is the same.
Open
So now,
primary.
if you only have 5, in most races, 5 or fewer people will be running.
Sure.
So what that means is we save the money.
Yeah.
In all the stuff in the primary, we go on, and it just happens in November, right?
So if
There'll
5
be a
or
few
fewer
races.
running, then
all
there is no
they all
primary.
advance.
They just go to the general,
Automatically
which
do
we
that.
save money on the election.
No need to have a primary.
Right. What I don't understand, though, is how does a ranked choice voting top 4 or top 5 eliminate the Adam Schiff gaming the system to promote? I don't. How does that eliminate?
Let's take Katie
And we've seen
Porter.
it here in San Diego. We saw Barbara Bree shout loudly that Todd Gloria was trying to promote Scott Sherman. We heard from David Alvarez that Kevin Faulkner was promoting Nathan Fletcher. So this isn't a new problem.
Correct. Right. And this is what we've learned is that and this is a coming together of reform organizations, ranked choice reform organizations, top 2 reform organizations that ultimately came together and said, guess what? If we blend our 2 concepts into nonpartisan, I should have emphasized that earlier, nonpartisan top 4 or top 5 ranked choice systems, we get the best of all worlds. We avoid the best criticisms of ranked choice, which is too confusing when you got 10, 12, 13 people and too easy to be manipulated. We then cure the big problem of top 2, which is, if you make the cut, remember, you're making that cut to 2 with a small turnout voter. So it's better than the cut at 1, right, in a separated partisan primary. But now we're going to allow the general election voters, where more people vote, to have more choice. And to make that choice in a way in which Katie Porter would believe that she has a chance with the voters to say, look at this negative campaigning. Look at this deceptive campaigning, right? It's a far more transparent system where the consultants have to think through and go, well, what's the consequence of my behavior? Right now, there is no consequence. It's a different electorate, first of all, they're speaking to in the primary. It's months away before it pays off. And the person that you've put off into the corner, whoever they may be, is gone, right? And so, let's look at it in the local election context. I'm a Democrat. I live in this district.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Juice is the Democrat candidate.
Mm-hmm.
I know that if I don't know the demographics of my district, I'm probably going to be inclined to vote for Kevin Juice. Now, but if I know that there's 0% chance that a Democrat will ever be elected in my district, would I look at the Republican candidates?
Yes.
Who are, I mean, it's Carl DeMaio and.
But it doesn't matter.
and
Let's
Mr.
say like
Hayes,
one's a moderate
right?
Republican, the other one's an extremist Republican.
Perhaps. I
What's
mean, I
the
didn't want
smart
to
vote?
characterize it.
Yeah,
I
no.
might make my choices in a different way. The point is that I might make that decision differently. On a top 4 ranked choice system, Carl and Hayes and Jusa, they're all going to get to November. Okay? Right? Now think about what the other value proposition of this is of reducing campaign costs. Right? There's no point in spending a ton of money in a primary election where we spend the highest amount of money per vote in the election cycle by far, because people are trying to return us in effect to the old system. Really what this is, what you're seeing happen in these two campaigns, one Democrat, one Republican, is an effort to twist us back to the closed primary system. Okay? And
Yeah,
so-
I would agree.
Yeah.
So if they're all going to get to the general, then they're less likely to. They're not going to be trying to prop up a candidate that they can defeat in the general.
They're going to be
because
talking about
there's going to be
themselves.
4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
They're going to be talking about themselves and selling their brand.
Yeah.
correct. And this is the other thing we know from both actual real world experiment as well as a number of studies, that the negative campaign certainly doesn't go away, but it's significantly diminished, because when you engage in negative campaigning in a ranked system, when the number is a small enough number of candidates for the voters to digest this information, when the voters have a choice, they'll penalize the negative campaigner. You know, we all talk about, well, why do politicians do negative campaigns? Because they work. They work in a binary environment.
Sure.
Right? And because I got no choice, right? But if I keep, let's just use the U.S. Senate race. If Katie Porter and Barbara Lee and Adam Schiff and
Steve
Garvey are all on the ballot, and Adam Schiff is doing this deceptive campaigning, and Katie Porter's doing the same response, the voter has a immediate ability to feedback back. Hey, Porter sounds reasonable. That sounds like a reasonable complaint. Adam, I like you, but this is bad behavior. You know what? I'm going to pick Adam still because he's my first choice, but I'm picking Porter second, right? Or maybe I'm just going to pick Porter. I'm going to knock you down to 2. Who knows? Whatever. But you
Yeah.
have a contemporaneous real world feedback
Maybe a Porter voter who normally maybe would rank Garvey second. Like,
Correct.
you know, I'm really upset with how he's treating her, so I'm going to rank him 4th or 5th.
Correct.
You know, I'm going to show him.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly.
Well, and that's what happened. That I should have said. That's a really good point. What also can happen is if you have the voters really, really, really detest
Right.
the behavior of the campaign, boom! All of a sudden, that possible 1 goes to 5, and that is a big deal. So I'll give you an example in a campaign that, and look, I've been around a long time. I did campaigns before I ran for office. I decided to run for office myself because I hated doing campaigns. I came to the realization it was not a creative exercise. It was more about picking winners than creating winners and whatnot. It just wasn't very satisfying. I enjoyed being in elected office, but I was a terrible campaigner. I was terrible. I was good at I lived thank God, in an era where you governed, and then you take some time away from governing to campaign for a short period of time. I hated campaigning. I wasn't good at it. It was hard for me. And I sucked it up and I did it because I enjoyed having the opportunity and the privilege to be an elected representative. And I got better. I was too young. I was 29 years old and I was elected. In retrospect, I never would have voted for me. But I learned over time. I had the incredible experience to deal with folks like Jess Unruh and Ken Maddie and Willie Brown, incredibly brilliant minds and whatnot. I learned, I got better. And and that's the way the system ought to work. It's a whole element of mentoring and whatnot.
System automatic, because I agree, right? We need rules to regulate that, and there's some cases of defamation. Obviously, nothing gets to that. Top 4 ranked choice voting. If you, Steve, are attacking Tony and you guys are going at
Going to
it,
get penalized.
I may be the one that ends up getting
Correct.
the benefit, right? So
Correct.
it's not in anyone's interest to get into a negative sort of debacle if I'm just talking about the good things, my brand, right? Contrasting to you guys who are just fighting around automatically.
Now, what it won't solve for is that consultant working for an independent IE campaign who will think through all that calculus.
Yeah.
Think about what this piece that DeMaio paid for on Juice.
For the Democrat.
Now, let's say he wanted to do the opposite. If he can get away with making it look like this is coming from people supporting Juice, right?
Yeah.
And you want to affect that voter behavior, then from an IE, and if they're willing to just make stuff up, as at least some of these consultants are prepared to do.
They can make me seem like I'm the one picking the fight with Tony.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly right.
So, ranked choice voting has been adopted in Maine, Alaska. Where else, Steve?
Those are the only 2 states so far that have on a statewide basis adopted.
what
Now, there are
cities?
lots of municipalities throughout the country that have ranked choice voting, not ranked choice top 5.
Yeah.
And again, they will be nonpartisan races typically, as we have in California, where we have nonpartisan local races. But
What cities have ranked choice top 4, top 5?
there are none.
There are none. So this is a novel approach. Okay, and it's to fix the ranked choice voting that wants you to rank 13, 14, 15 people, which is what they have in San Francisco, right?
2. In effect, on a local basis, we've always had top 2 where we have nonpartisan races.
Right.
Now, years ago, 30 years ago, the Democratic Party and parties in general were not allowed to endorse in local races. We stupidly changed the law years ago when I was in the legislature to allow for endorsing in municipal. That was a mistake.
Right.
And why is that a mistake? Because the parties have become laundromats for money
Yep.
that wants to influence political outcome and doesn't want to be disclosed.
Yep.
So a developer or whatever business enterprise or a labor union moves a bunch of money into the Democratic Party, or other politicians who they collect money for one office and then they move the money to the party when they're going down and running for a local office where there's campaign limits where they can't raise as much as they could raise in the other office, and they literally launder the money. Now, I'll be candid, I think that's illegal, and I think it's another example where our prosecutors have just done an incredibly poor job. And it isn't because, it's an interesting dynamic. Prosecutors, DAs, whatnot, have a hard time with politics, largely because they don't understand it. And they don't want to get into the dynamic of dealing with it. We have this very high-profile prosecution that's going on with one of the political consultants in San Diego, which, if you follow the truth, will lead you to a lot of other people behaving very similarly, if a little more clever, being a little more clever about it. It'll be interesting to see if the district attorney, who's making a lot of noise about prosecuting a particular person, and who, not arguing they shouldn't be, all right, but the reality is the behaviors are repeated by, and I would guess those folks would look around and look at some of the other folk and say, well, why me? Okay? And why aren't you going over here? Why aren't you going over there? I worry. I was born and raised here. I was blessed to have 3 kids, 8 grandkids, or all live here in San Diego County. Californians in general, San Diego's generally, we've had issues about corruption and whatnot occasionally, but it's been local, for the most part, localized. The big external controversy going many, many years ago that was potentially, what appeared at that time to be an infiltration of old-style East Coast mobster-type activity was the famous circumstance where the ownership of the La Costa Country Club came under the ownership of some shady characters. And we changed the charter in the city of San Diego to require the persons involved, directly or indirectly, in a transaction to be identified. And we had this high-profile case, 101 Ashwood Night, where that didn't happen. Okay? And it probably didn't happen because somebody made a mistake. And this is where things, but the folks that are sitting in DA's offices and whatnot, they know, everybody knows each other. And if we know each other, we're not inclined to believe they're bad people and everything. And, well, they just made a mistake. And so we kind of let things roll, and they go, and they kind of fudge this and do that. Well, the problem with that is there's all these peoples on the fringes of stuff, and they see the mistakes not being corrected, not being held responsible for, or there not being consequences. And then as those particularly new people come into the system, they think that's the way the system works. I'll never forget the experience of shrimp scam in Sacramento. I was a member of the legislature. The FBI, unbeknownst to any of us, came in, orchestrated a fake piece of legislation. And this legislation was designed to provide subsidies for raising shrimp in West Sacramento. There were only 5 members, 80 members of the Assembly, 40 members of the Senate. Only 5 people voted against this phony bill.
That the FBI created.
That the FBI created. I happen to be one of them. All right? Now, I'd like to tell you, because I just thought it was stupid. Why are we subsidizing shrimp? It was that simple. Now, I also looked and I noticed that the chairman of the committee had voted. I only saw it on the floor. It wasn't on the committee. The chairman of the committee voted against it, right? My seatmate voted against it. I voted against it. 2 other people voted against it. So we fast forward many, many months later, we find out this is a fake piece of legislation. And it's big news all over the country, right? And a number of legislators were arrested, prosecuted. But then, and including the then Assembly Minority Leader, Pat Nolan, all right, who was the Republican leader. Many, many years later, we learned, you know who called the FBI in? Who went to the FBI and said, you ought to run this sting?
Who?
Pat Nolan.
Really?
Now, how did this happen to Pat? Now, Pat has since spent some time in prison. Found God and everything. He's doing some great work. And I said, but look, Pat believed he was going to get Willie Brown. He told Willie Brown's running this, blah, 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 blah. Well, Pat understood everything he was seeing from the outside. Remember, at this point, he's a young guy. He just got elected. He's, wants blah, 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 blah. He really didn't understand. Willie Brown's most brilliant legislator I ever served with. Now, I've been on both sides. I've been with Willie's leadership, and I was part of a gang of 5 that tried to take on Willie. But this perception that Willie was doing shady stuff is just wrong, okay? And Willie understood how to play that perception, right? But Pat comes into the system, and he only saw the surface of Willie Brown, not the depth. And he ended up being the guy, because he's replicating the move, so to speak, right? And he ends up being the guy that gets burned.
Talk about irony.
Right. Well, look, think about that in the local environment we are today. Because we're letting the perception of corruption, let's be blunt, and no better example than this sports arena deal. We are allowing the perception of, I'll leave it to others to determine, how bad it really is. But nobody's looking, because you know what? Nobody wants to see it. The problem with that is, as new people come into the system and we empower people who previously weren't in the system, they think that's the way
It should be.
Yeah.
Pre-baked.
No, I understand what you're saying. So listen, on Dear San Diego, we call it a public affairs podcast with personality. We talk to newsmakers like yourself about the news. I mean, we could talk to you for hours, Steve. You're just a fascinating guy who's done all this brilliant work, not just as a policymaker, as a lawmaker, as a legislator, but you're a movie producer. You co-wrote and produced Attack of Killer Tomatoes, which is still a cult classic. I think that movie came out 20 years ago. People still talk about it. But so can you tell us a little bit about
50,
Steve Peace?
50, but who's counting?
Can you tell us a little? Thank you. A little bit about Steve Peace, the dad, Steve Peace, the grandpa. Those are the stories I think that no one really knows about you. That I'd like to share a little bit of that with our listeners. So what's fun for you that doesn't involve politics or policy or voter reform?
Well, I'm as I often tell, I'm retired from retirement from retirement.
Yeah,
So
thrice retired.
I'm not at all engaged, involved, or participating in politics at all. Haven't for years in any serious way, and now even more so. And some of that is ironically rooted in, as I mentioned earlier, I was 29 when I was elected to the legislature. I know exactly what it feels like to be a young person wanting to make things better and being frustrated with the inability of long time, and this was pre-term limits, older folks who are just ossified in their opinions. And it isn't that they aren't smart, isn't that they haven't done great work, but the world's changed and they haven't changed along with it. There's nothing, look, the fundamental.
This is a response to a question of me saying,
Well, this is why.
But it is who he
But
is.
I'm going. I extracted myself from from politics precisely because I don't think people my age. I think it's great to be in local government, be on the board of supervisors, whatever. But I'm 70 years old. The idea that there's 80-year-olds in the United States Congress and for president and whatnot is insane. I don't care how sharp you are. I don't care how qualified you are. I don't care what your life experience was to that point. There is no way on earth that the real world physical, mental, and emotional limitations that come with age
sure,
allow you to deal with a job with those kinds of stresses. It's not healthy for the person who's there, and it's certainly not healthy for the public. So my activity in Little League and playing in a bridge club, and I played baseball until I was 66. Played hardball.
Good for you.
Or choices that are personal but I spend 90% of my time as an Uber driver for my grandchildren, and so I have 8 grandchildren. They're all here in town, and they have lots of activities. My oldest granddaughter was in a School of Rock concert here last weekend, and that was great. And everybody's.
But you've managed to stay involved with public policy, this independent voter project.
Less than people think. I'm occasionally. What happens is,
I think you found a sweet spot that a lot of people, I think, would be envious of, because I think a lot of people have to make a choice when they get to be 65, 70, 75.
Look,
So Steve is like you
I
said.
think you have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, but no
You're
question.
thrice retired
Yeah.
from politics, yet you're still involved. A lot of people, because we work in the same industry, they call me and they say, like, what interest does Steve Peace have? Who is he protecting? And so I always try to explain. I don't know if they believe me, right?
Nah.
I think Steve Peace is like the Joker in reverse, right? He sees a system, a good system, and he's fighting for it. That's his only thing. And if he's got to bring the house down, he's going to try and bring the house down. What are his motivations, or where do they come from? Whether you agree with them or not, I don't know.
If I should, that's a really good point, though. If I should die tomorrow, I have lived an incredibly
you're
lucky
really
life.
blessed.
I mean,
Sure.
I went out and in my John DeBello and I, decided to do this crazy Killer Tomato movie along.
And you and your wife have 3 very successful sons.
I'll be married 50 years in July. I've married the most wonderful person on the planet who is, unlike myself, grounded. Rooted.
She's a Republican, right?
Yeah, she's a Republican.
That's pretty cool. I wish we could dig into that a little bit.
And my kids have, all grown and successful, their own kids. And look, they faced their trials and tribulations. I've faced my trial. We all do. I've had an opportunity to do interesting things. And leaving the legislature, I spent a number of years working as a board member of the Padres and working with John Morris and JMI.
I forgot about the Padres.
I was chairman of the board of a little company. In
Charmed life. I love it.
Yeah. The thing that people know least about me probably is I was chairman of the board of a small company called Athenify based in Chicago so I was on board for 7 years, the chairman of the board for 4. It was the company that invented the concept of dual factor authentication, which allows us to do banking transactions.
Oh, yeah.
And we ultimately sold the company to a consortium of banks. I got involved in that post-elective politics out of my interest in privacy and my concerns about technology. And we're now in the throes of that debate as AI comes in. I attempted to move a piece of legislation, constitutional amendment, in 1990, right around early 90s probably, that would have taken the existing California has a constitutional right to privacy, which the framers of the American Constitution considered, but ultimately decided not to include. This became pivotal in the whole abortion debate. The reason why the abortion conversation is different in California is we have an articulated right of privacy in our Constitution, whereas the Supreme Court had used different constitutional provisions to impute the premise of a right of privacy to reach the Roe decision. Okay, my concern as the very beginnings of the internet began to come and all this stuff began, and I created the California, the entire statute in California in terms of privacy rights. It's inadequate. What I wish we had done is pass the legislation that I couldn't even, I think I got it out of committee once, that made a simple determination that you own you. Think about this. My family owns the intellectual property rights to the term Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. But I don't own Steve Peace. And we now see this being played out in all this NIL
the AI
and all this stuff. Who we are, our identity, is intrinsic to our happiness. And for me, and it's going to be different for everybody else, my happiness is rooted in grandchildren. I couldn't care less about my kids. They're
already
doing
formed.
They're doing the thing. But now it's amazing. Now everybody's going to have a different arc and a different thing, and that's the overall point. I believe then, I believe today, that we should have then, and we should now, having failed then, although it'd be very hard to turn the clock back now. If we had done what I was trying to do, and I first got this awareness of this, interestingly enough, from a guy who owned a company that specialized in approving credit applications for renters. He came to me and he says, look, there's a problem. There's a lot of bad information. A lot of renters get screwed, but they get screwed because I, as a company, collect this information, but my contract is with the landlords. And I have financial consequence if I fail to put bad information. There is no financial consequence to me if someone gets denied, right? But if the landlord allows somebody to rent an apartment, something bad happens, and it turns out I failed to include information that should have been included, this relationship is backwards. It should be each individual citizen who contracts with a single entity that has their data, and that the sellers, the people, the businesses, whether it's the landlords or the retail, you want to get a retail credit, you want to buy a car, Juan Hernandez, who's your data provider? Joe Smith's data. Oh, okay. And then they provide that. Now that Joe Smith's data is answerable to Juan Hernandez, not to Chevrolet. Okay? It totally would have changed the dynamic. And 80% of the problems we now face with identity theft, just dispersion of abuse, and I think a lot of these things that are happening in the social media space would be totally fundamentally different if I had control. If I don't like the job Joe's doing, incidentally, I go find the next guy, right?
So we're going to run you for office again so you can go fix this problem.
Well, wait a minute. The problem with
tell
it,
the
of course, is
grandchildren.
that means you got to pay a fee.
They're going door to door for Grandpa Peace.
But that was the internet back then. Now it's artificial intelligence. It's hard.
Yeah, it's always
hard
gonna be
for
something, right,
politics
right.
to keep up with how fast
Yeah.
the actual world is moving, right? Someone once told me politics. Yeah.
That's why, in the faster that pace of change goes, the more important it is for old guys to get out of the way.
Obviously, it's pretty clear that your experiences in Sacramento helped shape you, especially when you were younger, 29, 30, 31. But who, before that, who shaped Steve Peace? Your mom was a very famous teacher in Chula Vista in the South Bay. I don't know too much about your dad, but who somebody along the way put something in you to help. I mean, you're dynamo. I mean, you're really, you are. You have all this energy. You have a brilliant mind, and it didn't all come from your time in Sacramento. Like, who planted those seeds when you were younger?
My mom had a lot of influence. My mom was a powerful, brilliant woman in an era when powerful, brilliant women became teachers, right?
Right.
And I can remember her always saying, she was a high school teacher, and I grew up also around. She was a high school level teacher and at Sweetwater High School, which was even in those days predominantly Mexican American students. I grew up with these older kids around me, as I would be dragged around, whether it was the inn at home, because my mom would bring a lot of kids home, and so as a young kid, I got around older kids. And then my mom was one of the teaching things. She was a debate teacher, and I got into debate. And John DeBello, who was my debate partner in high school, that's how we met. And that whole cultural exposure to debate and the family environment I grew up in, both with my mom, my dad, who also was a teacher in the El Cajon district, and then my parents divorced. I was incredibly lucky, and although that it was a shock to me and it was traumatic, but I ultimately got the benefit of a stepfather who was equally as totally different guy. He's an old Kentucky Democrat. It's kind of where I learned, got into the politics of such. Very different personality, different everything, and brilliant guy in his own right. And so I had the benefit of two father figures,
right? And this brilliant mother
and an environment where debate and was the rule. I remember my wife was just shocked when she walked into the thing, and so here's one of the things.
What were dinners like around the piece?
Pretty crazy. And I will tell you that if I look back at my time in office, one thing I didn't understand and didn't appreciate was because we were so open about debating and whatnot, not taking these things personal and arguing and that sort of thing. And then the aspect of pivoting back and forth between humor as part of an argument and all this kind of thing. Again, as I said, I was only 29 when I got elected. When you go and you become an elected official, and suddenly every environment you get in, they elevate you physically, set you up on a dais, okay? I would like to have gone back and done one thing differently. People say, well, what did you do differently? I think there's only one thing. I wouldn't do what you do. Some things work out, some things don't. But I would have had a better appreciation for the fact that a lot of times when I thought I was just engaging that energy level and being funny, people on the other end of it, particularly when I was conscious of who they were. I mean, they were people I beat the heck out of were lobbyists. In fact, I often said, bring somebody who's get paid to get yelled at to get in. Nevertheless, I would have been.
So what's the regret? What's the one thing you would have done differently?
To have been kinder. There were times when I thought it was all part of the repartee
I see.
of being clever, right?
Sure.
When you add to when you're sitting there and you're playing, and look, there's a lot of in the political world. It's very similar to the dugout. And a sports environment where there's a lot of
Right.
and giving people a hard time and all that kind of stuff. And
I get it.
And so I did not have a healthy appreciation for the fact that folks on the other end might have been taking things more seriously than I was, and that
Or
sometimes
personally,
people
yeah.
took me seriously, and it wouldn't even occurred to me then that they thought I was serious.
Well, for what it's worth, I've never heard. I've heard a lot about you, but I've never heard anybody say you were unkind. So,
Oh, I have.
so close this out, Juan.
I could tell you a few stories.
We usually ended with what we call rapid fire questions, and it's just you answer yes, no, this, that.
Good luck.
Coffee, tea.
Coffee.
What time do you wake up?
6 or earlier. Are you talking about you wake up just to wake up and go, or are you talking about waking up to pee?
Waking up and go. Waking up and go. We don't got to know about the other one. What time do you go to sleep?
11.
Favorite book?
Anything that is fiction. I do not want to read nonfiction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially if we're going to sleep. I like that.
Exactly. So, I just Stephen King. Anything I've read them all.
That's great.
Anything
Yeah.
Anything that takes you out of this reality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Puts you into a different one.
Yeah.
One piece of advice. If you could give one piece of advice for a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, not even in politics, to be happy, to be successful in life, which I consider them.
Yeah. What do you tell your
combined.
grandkids?
What do you tell them?
It's never as good as you think it is. It's never as bad. Nothing's permanent. Life's changed. It moves on. Take your lumps, get up, and move on.
It's good advice.
It's the same thing you do with the toddlers. They get up, they fall down, and their first instinct is to cry about falling down. If you ignore them and move on to the next thing, they'll be over it in a microsecond. And then you start using those lessons. I tell my kids now, as their kids now move into the era where there are real risks in life as they get older, that what you hope is they have a few bad encounters. You take the most obvious one is driving a car. Pray your kids have an accident early, that it's minor, because they're going to be infinitely better drivers the moment after they have the accident. The important things in life are challenges that come with difficult. Life's it's difficult, and it's far more difficult for most people. And what we do psychologically, whatever we're handed in terms of our luck or poor luck, there are lots of incredibly happy people living in unbelievably dire circumstances of poverty, and because their expectation level is rooted in that and whatnot, and lots of people fight their way off into better environments, and others don't. Okay. And those of us which is the overwhelming majority, even the least fortunate of us in this country, who are incredibly lucky, just pure luck of the draw to be in this environment, would do well to understand that our perception of what we need is entirely artificial.
Yeah. The point you made earlier about never too high, never too low. When Juan and I are dealing with clients who are in a crisis communication situation, we try to tell them, like, look, we know that you feel terrible and you want to put your head in the sand, but you're not always going to feel this way. You will survive this, especially if we make good decisions and we're transparent and we're honest. But in the moment, it's hard to see past that moment. I listened to a podcast recently where this baseball coach said, look, these pitchers who never have any arm issues and they get to college and they're in a brand new environment with classes they don't understand, kids that they're just meeting, and they get their first, tendinitis issue and they're out for a month. He's like, that's not a good situation. You want these kids to face adversity when they're younger so they can deal with it and understand that it's not the end of the world, right? And you persevere and you get stronger and you have that accident when you're 16 and not when you're 30, right? And you become a better driver. But anyways, you made all these wonderful points. I wanted to touch on a couple that resonated with me. Thank you very much for coming on, Steve Peace. You've been absolutely wonderful. Juan, you want to close us out here?
Thank you very much to the listeners. And this is Dear San Diego. This is Juan.
This is Tony.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Dear San Diego. Be sure to follow and subscribe whenever you listen to your podcasts. To read the blog associated with this episode, visit olasmedia.com. This episode was produced in studios located in San Diego, California, and Tijuana, Baja California. Creative Director, Ulysses Breton. Sound Engineer, Alan Glespar. Co-producer, Lena Alvarez. Executive Producer and Co-founder, J.C. Polk. Our President, Chad Peace. OLAS Media is an IVC media company.
Olas Media.
Dear San Diego's media partner is timesofsandiego.com. Timesofsandiego.com, Juan, has 700,000 readers a month. 700,000 readers a month.
1,000.
You got anything that you produce that gets 700,000 eyeballs?
I have. Not at the moment. Not at the moment. And it's only a digital news site, right?
Correct. It's online only. They've never printed their product. And that's really the editor and publisher there, Chris Genowine. That's what he'll tell you is one of their keys to success is they're not wedded to the printed product like some of these legacy media organizations, because print is 75% of your costs.
You know, I respect local news sites like that a lot, right? They don't have the funds, they don't have the money that the bigger organizations, the bigger publications have. I think they do it out of vocation. They do it out of a feel of community. So I respect them a lot. I support them. I think our listeners should support them too.
Absolutely. Times of San Diego is the only publication in Southern California that's featured on Google Showcase. And because Chris, he's a smart guy. He understands that my publication provides the content, but we're not the digital advertising whizzes that Google and Facebook are. So he's leaned in to this digital universe where some of these legacy media organizations have not.
Go to timesofsandiego.com, support local news, support timesofsandiego.com.